Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the really complex story of Venezuela. This is a country that's just defined by these two extremes: incredible wealth on one hand and just devastating crisis on the other.
Okay, let's start with a number. 300 billion. That's billion with a B. That's how many barrels of oil are in Venezuela's proven reserves. To put that in perspective, that is the largest reserve on Earth, more than Saudi Arabia, more than anyone.
And yet, despite all that black gold, 7.7 million people have fled the country since just 2014. Think about that. So you've got this brutal contradiction, right? Unimaginable riches buried underground, but a massive humanitarian crisis happening right on top of it. That is the Venezuelan paradox, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with this idea of a land of paradox, then look at its early history from colony to these military strongmen. We'll dive into the oil boom, the rise of Hugo Chavez and his revolution, and then the collapse. And finally, we'll see how it all plays out on the world stage.
So, let's just get this straight. Before oil became, well, everything, Venezuela was and still is this place of just incredible natural wonder. We're talking one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. You've got the Amazon rainforest, beautiful Caribbean beaches, and get this, the world's highest waterfall, Angel Falls. Just breathtaking stuff.
But here's the thing. Underneath all that natural beauty, there's a history that's been forged in conflict. The foundations of the country we know today, well, they were built on centuries of struggle and on just this constant, deep-seated instability.
So you can see it here. After the Spanish arrived, it took forever, 3 centuries, for Venezuela to finally get its independence. But, freedom didn't mean peace. Not at all. The 1800s were just chaotic, ruled by these regional military strongmen called caudillos. And this set the stage, really. It created this pattern of one-man rule, right as oil was being discovered, under the dictator Juan Vicente Gomez.
Then, boom, the mid-20th century. Oil completely changes the game. The amount of money pouring in was just insane, and it kicked off this era of wild prosperity. And for a while, Venezuela was actually a real outlier in Latin America. It was a stable working democracy, which was super rare at the time. But even back then, some people saw the writing on the wall. A key Venezuelan politician, one of the guys who actually founded OPEC, Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso, he called his country's oil the devil's excrement. Wow. He had this prophetic fear that all this money wasn't a blessing at all. He thought it was a curse that would eventually lead to ruin.
And fast forward to the end of the 20th century, and, well, it turns out he was right. Oil prices tanked, corruption was rampant, inequality was just skyrocketing, and all of that created this massive political crisis. And into that chaos stepped a very charismatic, very powerful new leader, Hugo Chavez.
Okay, so this is where you see the huge pivot. You had the old democratic model, right? That gets thrown out and replaced with Chavez's Bolivarian revolution. What was that? Well, it was a populist movement that took advantage of record-high oil prices. He just took all that money and poured it into huge social programs. It was an absolutely massive gamble, basically betting the entire country on the price of oil staying high forever. And yeah, Chavez used all that oil cash to make some big changes, but it came with a massive price tag. The economy got hooked, totally dependent on oil. It made up 86% of all their exports. They never bothered to diversify. At the same time, they were racking up enormous foreign debt, and the country was getting more and more politically divided. The whole thing was basically a house of cards, just waiting for a breeze.
Then, Chavez dies in 2013. His chosen successor, Nicolas Maduro, takes over this super fragile system. And this is really the beginning of the end for the petrostate. That's what you call a country where literally everything, the government, the economy, depends on oil money. And then, just a year after Maduro takes power, the price of oil completely collapses.
And this is the key thing to understand. When those oil prices crashed, the engine of the Venezuelan state didn't just sputter, it completely seized up. After years and years of mismanagement and not putting any money back into their own oil industry, when the cash flow stopped, production just fell off a cliff. Look at that chart, it's a nosedive.
So you see, it wasn't just one single thing. It was a total, perfect storm. The oil price crash, that was the spark. But then you throw in crippling U.S. sanctions, corruption that was just baked into the system, and that total failure to reinvest in their own infrastructure. It was a recipe for disaster.
And the result of that perfect storm? A complete economic meltdown. Just get your head around this number.
Between 2013 and 2020, the entire Venezuelan economy shrank by 80%. 80! It's hard to even imagine.
And of course, behind that number is a devastating human cost. We're talking about a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. Runaway hyperinflation, where your life savings become worthless literally overnight. People couldn't find food, they couldn't find medicine, and that led directly to that mass exodus we talked about at the very beginning.
Okay, so this collapse didn't happen in a vacuum. It created a really volatile situation on the world stage. Now, to explore where this could lead, we're going to look at one specific scenario that's detailed in our source material. It's important to say this is a speculative event, an idea of how the world might react when a country with so much wealth suddenly becomes unreachable. And that brings us to this question, which is really at the heart of the whole thing. What happens when a country's resources become uninvestable? Because it's not enough to just have oil in the ground, right? You need to be stable enough for the world to actually get to it. So what happens when that stability just, poof, disappears?
So again, I want to be really clear here. What we're about to discuss is a speculative scenario from one of our geopolitical sources. We're just reporting on it neutrally. This source lays out a possible future event, a U.S. military operation in January 2026, which it frames as the ultimate consequence of this whole crisis spiraling out of control.
And the whole point of a scenario like this, according to the source, is that it would flip a switch. Venezuela would go from being a country under sanctions to being an active war zone. And for global markets, for international investors, that's a world of difference. The country's oil, all that wealth, would essentially become untouchable, completely uninvestable.
And this quote from Jack Lifton really just nails it. Resources only matter if you can mine them, process them, finance them, and deliver them to market reliably. Without that, reserves are just numbers on paper. And that's Venezuela's story in a nutshell, the world's biggest oil reserves. But if you can't get it out of the ground and sell it, it's just a number. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that having stuff in the ground isn't enough, not even close. Without stability, without good governance, without trust, that wealth can actually become a trap. It's the classic resource curse. And that leaves us with one final, really tough question. When a nation's greatest blessing becomes its greatest curse, how in the world do you break that cycle?